Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 18, 19, and 20 of Fire Emblem Thracia 776. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. It is a beautiful fall morning, currently for me, when I'm recording this. 56 degrees outside, which is nice. You know, just long sleeve t-shirt weather. But it is 77 degrees in my apartment, which I know I complained about in the summertime being super hot. But the nice thing about it is that it is now insulating the heat very well for the fall and hopefully the winter time. And I cannot wait to go out and enjoy the day. But before that, I wanted to record a little bit of this episode because I knew that I wasn't going to have time this weekend. And I really want to try to get this episode out sooner rather than later. So we're doing it now. So I'm very excited to get into these chapters and to start talking about them. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to go and answer that question that I asked you guys last episode, which is, which route do you prefer, A route or B route? At Biozilla said, it was a smart decision, albeit a frustrating one for me, to divide elements relevant to the narrative into two routes as opposed to leaving one route irrelevant. While Princess Miranda is an important figure in the Thracian Peninsula, I ultimately prefer Route A. It's satisfying to deliver Kempf his just desserts. Moreover, Leif's reflection on the night Leinster fell is one of the best moments in the game in my book. Yeah, I mentioned this briefly in the episode, although I don't even know if I went into the full thought that I was having in the moment, but if you listen back to the episode, you can hear me kind of like start to hint at this, which is that it's a bummer in a sense that you need to play through this game multiple times to get the full picture. On the other hand, I kind of like that, and I think I'm only really bothered by it here because A, I don't like this game, and B, in other games, it's usually like more of a big deal, right? Like in FE8, obviously there's like the whole central focus of the middle part of the game is across this route split. So it makes more sense there, I feel like. But little 2-chapter splits like this, giving you completely different pictures of the events of the game, is a little bit frustrating. I know they do it again in FE6. I don't remember how much of the story is locked behind each route in that game. But I think for the most part, it's pretty much just more of the same, basically. It just focuses on like a different aspect of it. So, I don't know. I just think that replaying this whole game again for 2 chapters is like a little excessive, but if you're going to replay this game again anyway, as I know a lot of people play these games more than once, it makes sense to have that option to get a different experience, I guess. I'm a fan of route splits in general. I think they're pretty good. I think that for this one specifically, I'm a little bit unhappy with kind of how the split happened. But here we are. Anyway, Biozilla prefers A route, which I think is completely reasonable. I think it has a lot of good moments, especially in the gameplay, but also in the narrative. As he says, giving Kempf his just desserts is very satisfying. Love Kempf, he's a great villain. And I do also really enjoy that scene in the end of chapter 16A with Leif reflecting on the night Leinster fell. That's a great moment, I agree. One of the best in the game for me as well. So yeah, I think I mentioned this already, but I prefer A route. I feel like I did my best to give a pretty even-handed argument for both sides. But my personal preference is that I also prefer A route. Mostly for the gameplay, but also for some narrative moments that I think are better in A route. And then I got a few answers over on Discord as well, mostly people saying A route. That wasn't really surprising to me. I did see a couple people say, not necessarily say B route was their favorite, but made me think of something that I hadn't considered as a reason for why someone might prefer B route, which is that B route is easier. I don't really see it that way, personally, because I think that it, like, yes, it requires less skill. You have to be less aware of, like, what's going on. But honestly, to me, that's not, like, if a map is an absolute slog to play, I don't know if I would consider that easier per se, but I could see the argument for sure. I'm sorry if I sound a little sick, by the way. I'm not sick. I at worst I have like a cold. I just feel a little congested this morning. I think I woke up with like a head cold, I guess would be the right word. I don't know, but all right. Now, for this episode's question, what I would like to know is, who do you prefer between August and Dorias? Because I think they both have merit, especially after the events of the episode that we're about to talk about. Who do you prefer between Dorias and August? Because I think a lot of people, have their preference for one or the other. I think, especially with the events of these chapters that we're about to talk about, I think Dorias has a lot more of a leg to stand on. Earlier, I think pretty much most people were going to agree that August is better. I could be wrong about that, but I would say probably most people prefer August at that point. But then Dorias gets a cool moment here that we're going to talk about. I won't spoil it in case you're not familiar with it yet, but I mean, I guess that's kind of silly because I'm going to be talking about it in like half an hour anyway, but you know what I mean. Anyway, yeah, that's the question. August or Dorias? Tactician Bowl, let's go. Who do you prefer? I think I've made it pretty clear what team I'm on. We'll just have to see. Maybe after having another little bit of time to think it over, maybe I'll change my mind. Who knows? Alright, so with that done, we can go ahead and get started talking about our episodes for the chapter. Nope, not that. We can go ahead. Fuck it, we're rolling with it. Starting with Chapter 18, The Liberation of Leinster. So it opens up, surprise, surprise, on an enemy POV. This time we see Gustav, who we've heard a little bit about, talking to Xavier, who we've also heard a little bit about. Basically, I don't know if gaslighting is the right word, but essentially manipulating Xavier into making him feel like shit and saying like, hey, you betrayed these guys, there's no way they're ever going to take you back. You might as well just fight for me to the bitter end because you're going to die anyway, so you might as well give yourself the best possible chance. And Xavier agrees, saying like, yeah, I know that what I've done can never be forgiven, and I would rather die fighting them on the battlefield than just being executed for treason or whatever, so might as well. Then we switch over to Leif. He's talking to August about how their army is split in two, which he questions the tactical efficacy of, but August says, no, don't worry about it. This is definitely what we gotta do. This is an element of this game that I haven't really talked about, but I am going to mention it here because it is very relevant for this episode, especially. Both this chapter and next chapter, and actually also chapter 20, so it comes up a lot here. Essentially, unlike in later Fire Emblem games, you cannot switch around the placement of your units. You can in most Fire Emblem games. I think that actually you cannot in any Kaga game. Maybe FE3. I don't know enough about FE3. But in FE1 and 2, I know you can't. In FE4, all of your guys start in the castle anyway, so there's not really a point. And then in this game, you cannot switch around where your units start off the map on. Which can be frustrating in situations like this, where it's like, oh, man, I really would have liked it if I could have a thief over on that side so that I could open a chest. Or, if you have two thieves and you want all the treasure, you have to deploy them on both sides, but then they end up on the same side, and it's like, all right, great, awesome. But this game gives you enough tools to deal with it. You can actually manipulate it. I've never really bothered with it, both because it seems like really annoying and I don't want to bother with it, but also it seems kind of counterintuitive, right? Like, especially, like, this has to have been an intentional design choice. People have hacked in the ability to do this, which I think is a nice quality of life option. Personally, I don't think I would ever play this game that way because of all the quality of life options, I think that one is honestly one that I'm more okay with because I think it leads to some interesting situations where you need to play around your characters being put in unfavorable positions. I think that that's actually one of my favorite elements of Fire Emblem games. I think maps that make you do that are more interesting in general than maps that don't. And I think that this is a good example of that. I have many more. I think I've already talked about Chapter 7 from FE4. How it starts off, you have Finn, Nana, and Leif down at the bottom, which, hey, funny coincidence that we're talking about that here, but we'll get to that. And you have to play with these suboptimal units. It would be completely pointless if you could just, arrange them in whatever way you wanted. It's kind of the same thing here, right? Where it's if everything went perfectly, it would be a little bit boring. So I'm fine with it, really. I don't think it's much of a problem. And I think in some instances, like next chapter, as we're about to see, it can actually really enhance the experience. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So they're talking about how to talk down Xavier. And August basically says, well, they tell you pretty explicitly how to do it, right? They say, hey, if you open the prison cell and have the hostages come out and talk to the soldiers that are with Xavier, they will defect, and you can, recruit him that way. You're now starting to see where this becomes a problem, right? So they give you that explanation. I'll talk a little bit more about recruiting Xavier in just a moment, but I think it's important to kind of get a whole overview of this map. First of all, you're split up on two sides. There is a connecting point between the two sides of the map, but it's in the middle, so you're not going to get there until pretty late into the map, once most of the other enemies are gone. There are treasure chests on both sides, and enemies or thieves who are trying to get that treasure and steal it away. There's some pretty good stuff in here, a body ring, most notably, although I've never actually been able to get the body ring. I tried a few times, I had to reset this map a bunch, and I never managed to pull it off. I don't know what you're supposed to do, but I was never able to do it, so it's not that big of a deal. A body ring can be nice, but also it doesn't really matter. It's not like it's a super good stat booster. I don't know. There's also a scroll here in the top left. I think it's the Norrøn scroll, which is fitting because this is Leinster, and this is where, the descendants of Norrøn have their seat of power. And then there's a couple other miscellaneous things that you can grab. Now, on the left side, there is a prison cell, which contains 8 NPCs. And then if you look in the middle, you'll see that there's Xavier, and around him are 12 armor knights. 4 of them are just regular Frege Imperial soldiers, but 8 of them have portraits and names. And what you need to do is each NPC in the cell corresponds to a knight with a face. These are Leinster knights, Xavier's subordinates that were talked about in 17b, who are kin to him. And each of them need to speak to an NPC in the cell, at which point they will turn green, and they'll start to try to run away, I think, basically. You need to do this for all 8 guys, and then talk to Xavier with Leif, and then you can recruit him. This is a fucking nightmare in a lot of ways, and it is considered by many, probably myself included, although we'll talk a little bit more about it, to be the hardest recruitment in the series. Now, I don't know if I got lucky or what the deal is, but I was able to find a pretty consistent way to do it, which I'm happy with, for sure. But it required a few things to go right. And I'll talk a little bit about it in just a moment. But let's talk about some of the things that make this a little bit easier, and then some of the things that make this a little bit harder. So, pros, on the pro side, on the things that make this easier side. If a Leinster Knight turns green and then dies, it doesn't matter. It still counts. Now, that was it. That's the only thing. Everything else about this whole situation exists just to screw you over. So, the NPCs have 0 stats across the board. They will die immediately. Most soldiers, I guess this is kind of one other thing that makes it easier. They will not kill the civilians. The Leinster Knights will not attack the civilians, and the Frege Knights don't usually attack the civilians. They instead go to capture them, which you can kill them, and then the guy pops back out and you're good to go. Now, on the other hand, what makes this frustrating is that if you turn one of these guys green, the other Leinster Knights will attack him, and he can die. The Green Knight can die. But if he kills any of the Red Knights in retaliation, the Knights that you still have not changed into NPCs, that's, you're out of luck. You have to turn all of them green before they are allowed to die. So it's very frustrating to see this in action because it's really difficult to find a consistent way to do this. There are ways, though. One of the most common recommendations is to use the sleep sword. If you have the sleep sword, you can use them to put one of the enemies to sleep. And the NPCs, thank God, can still talk to them and turn them into green units. Now, if you try to put Xavier to sleep, Leif will not be able to talk to him because you cannot recruit somebody who is asleep, unfortunately. Or you cannot talk to somebody who is asleep. We saw this with Trude back in chapter 12X. But you can put the green NPCs to sleep, or you can put the Leinster Knights to sleep, and the NPCs will still be able to talk to them and recruit them for the purposes of this task. Now, the most consistent way that I've found to do this is my first time recruiting Xavier, so maybe in the future I'll have a different method or whatever. But here's what I have figured out. So the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you have a unit who has, I think it needs to be at least 17 constitution or build. Maybe 18. Someone with 20 is preferable just to make it easy and guarantee it. But you need to make sure that the Armor Knights cannot capture them. And I'm pretty sure they have a con stat of, I believe it's 15 or 16. I don't remember which one. And then the variance is plus or minus 2. So it can be as high as 17 or 18. So you need someone who hits that build threshold. You could also just reset until you get lucky and roll everyone low on build. But there's 8 characters that you need to worry about this for. So it's probably better to just not bother. This is important, right? Because there's no mounting in this chapter. All foot unit or all horseback units or mounted units are going to be on foot for this chapter. So you can't get away with just having Finn or somebody on their horse and have them be not capturable that way. Okay. Now, once you got that, you need to make sure through some method, if you want to manipulate it, great. Otherwise, you'll have to get lucky, I guess, or have more than one that fits this qualification. But that unit needs to be on the right side of the map. And then meanwhile, the other thing you need is a sleep sword. It can just be one, but you need a sleep sword, and it needs to be on somebody who is on the left side, near the prisoners. Once you have both of those things, and you have them in the places you need them to be... Oh, and the 20 build guy needs to be pretty tanky, because they're still going to attack them, they're just not going to be able to capture them. And also you need some kind of method of attacking at range, but that's pretty easy. You could always just use like a flame sword or a bow or just magic. So once you have all of those things, you can start the map. You do everything you need to do. You save the chests. You kill the thieves. You block the reinforcements. That's important. There's a shitload of reinforcements in this map. A lot of them are very threatening, especially like dark mages and stuff. Once you have done all that, you position your high build guy, high bulk, high build guy in the right doorway and you open it. That'll make the knights go after you. They'll bottleneck, right? So you can kill the Frege Knights with someone who can attack at range. Make sure you don't kill one of the Leinster Knights by accident. Oh, give them a scroll too, because I think these guys have killer weapons. So give them a scroll as well. And also make sure the high build guy is unequipped and doesn't have any weapons. There's a few steps you need to have this be consistent, but you'll get there eventually. Now, once it's just the Leinster Knights and they're all going after this one guy and they're all bottlenecked in the corner, you open the left door. You need to bait Xavier to attack somebody in a position that will move him out of the way, and then he's stuck there. He's not going to do anything. The reason you do this is because otherwise the NPCs will just walk right through his range and he'll go after them. You don't want that to happen. And maybe he doesn't attack them, but I didn't want to risk it, so I just had him go after one of my guys. He's pretty dangerous. He has a killer bow and a master axe. So just be prepared for that. Now, once you have done all of this, you have the guy with the sleep sword come in and bait the armor knights, the Leinster knights, one by one into going for him and hitting them with the sleep sword. You need to make sure that you're doing this in such a way where it doesn't make it impossible for the NPCs to get to the other knights and things like that. There's some considerations you need to take into account here, but as long as you're being reasonably careful, you should be fine. Then, once all of that is done, all the knights are asleep, you open up the prisoner doors, and they will all automatically go to the guys they need to go to, turn them all green, and then you talk to Xavier and you recruit him. This is the most consistent strategy that I have found. I have not personally seen a more consistent strategy in any guides or YouTube videos or anything like that. At least not ones. There's also the method of nuking your hammer and staff to have Tina steal all of the Leinster Knight's weapons. That's also a possibility, but it requires you to burn 4 hammer and staff uses, and it's just not worth it. This is probably a more reliable method overall. I think you can make the argument that it was actually even intended to be done in a manner similar to this, because August does say at the beginning of the chapter, rescuing the hostages will require 2 teams working in tandem. And the only way that I can read that is that he's talking about something like this, where one group is baiting the armor knights, one group is rescuing the hostages and having them, do what they need to do. I don't know though, I could be wrong. Now, once you've done all that, you can recruit Xavier, and we should talk about him now, because there's a lot to talk about here. This is going to be a long episode, I think, because there's a lot of different factors in all of these chapters, but Xavier is a pretty good character and a pretty good unit, I would say. He is an armor knight. We'll start with the gameplay side of things. He is an armor knight, and that makes it kind of rough. I think he has a leadership star. Here, let me check before I start talking out of my ass. Yeah, he has 1 leadership star, so that's pretty cool. He's got decent stats, nothing really special, nothing to write home about. He has a 0 pursuit critical, but what really makes him noteworthy is his weapon ranks. He has really good weapon ranks. He can use every type of physical weapon, I should say. And he's decently good at swords. He's terrible with lances, but you could always give him an iron lance or something if you wanted to. And then axes and bows he has A rank in. So he can use every type of bow and axe in the game, except for personal ones. This makes him a great candidate for the Brave Bow if you're not using Selfina or any other units who would use the Brave Bow, as I am not. So giving him the Brave Bow might be a good call. He has good skills, a cost, which is what Dagdar has, Pavis, or Pavice, I think it's Pavis, which has a chance to nullify attacks and just make them not go through at all. And then Wrath, which we've already seen how broken that can be, especially on someone who can use 1-2 range weapons like the Master Axe. Which he joins with, by the way. He joins with the Master Axe. So overall, he's a pretty good filler unit. I think that if you're looking for... This game has a lot of chapters where you're allowed to just take a ton of units. So having him around is definitely not a bad idea. He can fill a slot on your team if you just need somebody who's going to be competent and be able to do pretty basic combat. Really good defenses. So overall, I think he's pretty solid all around. In terms of his character, I actually quite like Xavier. I think he's a pretty standard, loyal knight guy. But I think the plight of him caring about these knights he's with so much to the point where he's torn between doing what's right for the people he cares about versus doing what's right for his nation and his country. And I think the fact that it makes you arduously live that through the gameplay is really interesting. I've talked a lot of times about how Thracia really nails the gameplay story integration, and I'm going to talk about it a lot more, especially in the next chapter. But Here, I think it is another great example how, it's this very difficult task, which makes sense, right? Because if it was easy, he would have just done it himself. I think the only way that I would change this is to just make Xavier better, because I think that he's a good unit, but I think that for something like this, you should really be getting a great unit out of it, and it makes it more enticing, because I think the majority of people who are playing through this game, especially if they don't care about like completionism or full recruitment, they're just not gonna bother, right? They might try like once or twice and they'll be like, all right, this isn't worth it, and then just kill Xavier, which you could argue is maybe the point. But also, I think that if he was a really good unit, it would make it more enticing for people, and then it would be like an actual, like if I wasn't doing full recruitment for this podcast, I would not fucking ever recruit Xavier. He's never, ever in a million years would I recruit Xavier if I was not intentionally doing a full recruitment podcast. But I am, so I had to come up with a method. But my point is that if he was really good, more people would make that decision on their own instead of having it be based on like, oh, I kind of want to get every character even if I'm not going to use them very much. I don't know. It's a nitpick, but I think it is something to consider for sure. Now, that is not the only noteworthy thing about this chapter. There is another thing that you can get from this chapter, and that is the secret card. The secret card is a recurring item throughout the series. I believe it was in FE 1 and 3, although I could be wrong about that. But this is the first time we're seeing it on this podcast because it was not in FE4. What the secret card is, the member card, what that does is if you have it in your inventory, you are able to visit secret shops in various maps throughout the game and in later games in the series as well. There are specific tiles on the map that if you have a unit with the member card, stand on those tiles, they can visit the secret shop, which has some really great weapons and items in there that you're going to want to buy. Now, in most games, this is definitely a worthwhile investment. Even if you need to go a little bit out of your way to get it, I think that's perfectly reasonable. There's some really good stuff you can get from these shops, including stat boosters, promotion items, sometimes really good weapons, things that you wouldn't normally be able to get, especially not like repeatably. So it's really handy to have. Now, in this game, the way that you get the member card is by playing through this map, and throughout the map there are various soldiers. I think they all have javelins, because of course they do, because fuck you. And if you hover over them, you will see that they are not Frege, they are from Leinster. And you need to not kill any of these guys to get the Master Card. Now, this is frustrating, obviously, for a multitude of reasons. I will say that, according to my sources, which may or may not be correct, I haven't done any digging into it personally, you can capture them and then release them, and it will still count as them being alive for the purposes of this check. Doing that, though, is a lot easier said than done, because frankly, they are suicidal and they will kill themselves on you on multiple occasions. I really did. I tried my best. I didn't go out of my way for it, but every time I restarted the map, I tried to do this, and it just wasn't working. They kept suiciding off of me, and eventually I decided that this just wasn't going to happen, and I needed to be okay with that. I will be sure to mention any secret shops that we see in the future, and what you will be able to buy there if you decide to go through with this and get the member card. But for me, for my playthrough, I'm not going to be bothering with this because it's not worth it. In later games, the member card is typically a lot easier to get, although still usually a challenge. And in those games, it's more worth it. Sometimes it's also called the VIP card, I guess, if you've played I think the DS games do that. So expect more from that in the future, but I did not get it in this game, and I probably never will, because it does not seem like it's worth it to me personally. They also just have really, really low stats, so if they attack you, even if it's a pretty weak unit that they're going for, they will still probably die, just because their stats are so bad. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, we can finally capture the gate, or the throne in this case, kill Gustav, and end chapter 18. Now, this is a huge victory for Leif, both in terms of like actual resources, because now he has this whole castle to operate from, but also morally. This is huge for his group. A lot of the people here really care about Leinster, especially like, Finn and, his Dorias and a lot of the guys who are working with him who are from Leinster nobility. So this is a huge win for them, and they're very excited about it. There's a nice little scene here with Finn and Leif. I mean, it's very, very short. It's just 2 lines, but Finn says that he doesn't have the words, basically to express how happy he is, and that's just so sweet. I love Leif. Now, after this, Leif decides that he wants to keep the ball rolling. Depending on whether or not you have Miranda, the scene here is a little bit different. If Miranda is alive and she's with you, she will come up to Leif and say, hey, I need you to keep your promise right now. And I really don't like this version of the scene, and we'll talk about this. I'm going to do I think at the end of the episode probably, I'm going to do a whole overview of how I feel about this entire thing, all the aspects of it. And for now, I'm just going to give you the straight facts of what happened, and I'm going to save my opinions on them for later. So that one snuck out, but for the most part, I'm just going to be telling you straight up and down what happens. If Miranda is there, she says, Leif, I need you to keep your promise, and Leif says, okay, I'm going to go and capture Ulster right now. If Miranda is not there with you, instead it is a random woman from Ulster who comes up to Leif and says, hey, Ulster's in a really bad situation, and there's been a rebellion against the Empire, and the citizenry does not stand a chance, so you need to go and help them. Now, in both situations, Leif decides, yes, I'm going to go to Ulster, and I'm going to commit troops there and save the people. Both Dorias and August are against this plan. They say, Leif, we need to talk about this. We are exhausted. We just got this huge victory, but we are still in shambles right now because we just got back Leinster. We don't have the manpower to do this. For once, both Dorias and August agree on something, which is pretty interesting. But Leif ignores both of them and decides to go to Ulster anyway. In fact, he gets a little uppity with them. He even says, Dorias, August, you would have me stand idly by and let the people of Ulster be wiped out? They sheltered me when I was but an infant, and it was Queen Aithins? I don't know how to pronounce that. It was the Queen's love and care that kept me alive. Father would never forgive me if I didn't repay their kindness. If you can't understand that, you can just wait in this damn castle. And August snaps right back and says, how disappointing. I'd hoped you'd grown into a man, but you still think like a child. Now, Dorias agrees to it. He says, fine, I will go, but I'm going to lead half of our army, not the whole thing, just half of it, because we just don't have the manpower to do this. They're exhausted. They're not going to be able to make it through this if we push them that hard. And Leif says, okay. Now, there's a little bit of a silent understanding here between Dorias and August. We're not privy to their internal thoughts, obviously, but August seems to understand that something is going on and actually offers to lead the vanguard instead. But Dorias says, no, August, you need to stay with Leif and guide him further. And eventually August says, okay, fine, I will do that. And Dorias leaves. Right before he leaves, though, he goes to Leif and says, hey, you finally got back Leinster. Good job. You are now a true and proper ruler. You are a prince. And don't forget that, or something like that. And Leif agrees and says, okay, I'll keep that in mind. And this is where Leif promotes. Having the lords have fixed promotion points is pretty standard throughout the series. It's probably about a 50-50 split for ones that do versus ones that don't. So this is where Leif's stats finally become unshackled. He can get level ups again. He was already pretty good. Like he's a solid unit. He got a couple of move level ups for me early on, if you remember. So he's doing pretty well. But now I can get him level ups again, and he's going to be getting stats, and it's going to be nice. It's going to be great. But with that, Dorias leaves, and that is the end of Chapter 18. Now, as I said, I'm going to be talking about all of this at the end. So rather than deliberating, I'm going to go ahead and move right into the next chapter, whose title might give you a little bit of a clue of what we're about to see, but it's called Chapter 19, The Empire's Retaliation. This chapter starts with a messenger coming to Leif and saying, I am from the vanguard that we sent to Ulster ahead of you, and it has been completely wiped out. Everyone's gone. Some of us managed to escape, but Dorias died in the process. He used himself as a diversion to give everyone else time to escape. Leif kind of sinks into his own despair a little bit here, but Dorias manages to snap him out of it and say, Leif, we gotta get going, we gotta pull our troops back, or else Dorias will have died for nothing. At which point we get to an enemy POV. Hey, a chapter that didn't start with an enemy POV. Instead we get one now, and basically Bloom says, hey, he talks to the boss and he says, hey, go capture Leinster. We've already wiped everyone out, we gotta go get Leinster. Then the scene cuts to a couple of familiar faces. If Amalda and Connemore are still alive, then they will show up here. One of them will always be alive, but in this case, Amalda, I took B route, Amalda is on B route, and I did kill Amalda, so Amalda is not here. But Connemore is, and Amalda would be if you left her alive. Same for A route. Amalda is always going to be there, but Connemore could potentially not be if you killed him, but he might be if you didn't kill him. We'll talk about their recruitment in just a minute. The way the map is set up is very interesting. It is a long, vertical stretch with one half of your army starting at the bottom and one half of your army starting at the top. It's an escape map, but the catch is that Leif starts right next to the escape point. So, and along with about half of the guys you deploy. Now, theoretically, you could just have everyone near Leif retreat into the castle, and then have Leif retreat into the castle, and end the map immediately. So the challenge of this map is not actually beating it. That's incredibly easy. You could do it on turn 1 with 0 effort. The trick of this map is deciding how many of your units are you willing and able to save in the process. Because on the bottom half of the map are the units that went with Dorias to capture Ulster, and that failed and are trying to escape. There are also some NPCs there as well that give you, I believe it's a Master Seal? If they all escape? Yes, it's a Master Seal. So it has that going for it as well. There's also a few houses. None of them have particularly good items. There's a couple of heal staves. There's some holy water. Some decent weapons. The only really notable thing is a speed ring. Oh, and I guess holy water and magic up staffs are good. There's also a magic up staff. So, decent items for sure, but not the end of the world if you skip out on them. So, really, the trick here is how many of your units are you going to try to save? And how many of your units are going to die in the process? Now, I've teased this out a couple times before, but I'm going to say it right here, just to get it out of the way. This is probably my favorite chapter in the game. Almost certainly my favorite chapter in the game. And I would go as far as to say top 10, maybe even top 5 maps in the entire series for me. There are a number of things I really like about it, but I think maybe my favorite part of it is how it incorporates mechanics that I've talked about, some of which I've even complained about in the past, and fuse them together to make this really excellent gameplay story experience. The fact that you can't rearrange your characters on the preps menu is huge, because if you could, then you could just deploy a bunch of shitters that you don't care about, have them all start on the bottom, and then just leave, and leave all those guys behind because you don't care about them. No. You don't know who's going to end up where. So you could very easily end up with characters that you really care about, like Orson or Finn or Dagdar on the bottom. And what, are you just going to leave them behind? I mean, maybe, but you need to weigh that option. Like, is it worth it to be without these guys so that I can get out of here safely and unharmed? The fact that Leif needs to be the last person to escape or else everybody else gets captured is a mechanic that I've complained about in the past. I don't know if I've complained about. I think I've complained about the way the game conveyed it, but I think it's like a fine mechanic most of the time. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. But here it is used to absolutely great effect. Because if it was just like any other escape map in the series, or any other game's version of an escape map, you would just have Leif escape turn 1 and the whole conceit would be completely ruined. One mechanic that I haven't even talked about up to this point is minimum deployment. Maybe I have talked about this actually, it's starting to ring a bell, but most games don't really have a requirement for how many units you need to deploy. Obviously, the Lord is required in most games to be deployed, but usually that's it. And then if you're doing like a skirmish or something, the minimum is typically 1, maybe 2 or 3, depending on the circumstances. But in this game, every map has a minimum deployment. You need to deploy. Again, depends on the map, but some maps are like 6, 8, 10. Doesn't really matter because you're probably going to be deploying a bunch of units anyway. But here it's used to really good effect because the minimum deployment and the maximum deployment is very similar. They're very close together. So you need to deploy a bunch of units even if you don't want to, so that the effect of this map is maximized. All of these elements coming together to make an experience that really puts you in the shoes of Leif. You need to play this out. You are not just seeing Leif either rescue or give up on his men in a cutscene. You need to make that decision. Are you going to rescue all of these guys, or are you going to just make a break for it and run away? Are you going to rescue some of them but not all of them? Are you going to let some of them get captured? Playing this game blind, this is the only time that I will ever acknowledge playing blind as a benefit, because if you're not playing blind, the impact of this is lessened a lot by the fact that you know you're getting these guys back very soon. In just a couple of chapters, in chapter 21X, we are going to be visiting a prison camp, at which point we will be able to get all of the characters who have been captured over the course of the game back. And there's only a couple of chapters until we reach that point, so losing characters here really isn't that big of a deal. But on your first playthrough, if you're playing blind, you do not know that. So you really have that pressure to like decide what is going to happen, what am I going to do here. Now, my choice in this was pretty limited because I am doing full recruitment, so I needed to at least recruit Connemore, which makes it impossible for me to just book it on turn 1. But it is still a really interesting conceit to a map, and I like it a lot. It is maybe the single best piece of gameplay story integration in the entire series. And I think, I mean, I've already said this, but I think it bears repeating. It is probably my favorite chapter in the game, just because of how interesting this setup is, how it really enhances the story in so many interesting ways, and I don't know, I think it's excellent. Now, if you are going to try to play this chapter regularly, you are going to have to make note of a couple things. First of all, the guys on the bottom are actually pretty fucking strong, so it might honestly be better to let your units get captured than risk having them be killed. But if you are able to, if you have some good units down there, I had like Fergus, I had a couple of guys who were really strong, they can make some good headway. Nana really got to see some action this chapter, which I was a fan of. Now the problem is that reinforcements just keep coming and coming and coming and coming, so you are going to have to make a break for it eventually. But you do have enough time where you can, get some houses, recruit whichever character you're going to want to recruit, and then go from there. Sending out guys from the top to help is also a pretty good idea, although most of the main action is probably going to be over by the time they get there, but, kind of depends on how things go, I guess. Connemore and Amalda, as I've mentioned before, You recruit Amalda by talking to her with Sloof, and you recruit Connemore by talking to him with Miranda. Amalda actually gives you a hint as to how to recruit her in this chapter. I mean, she doesn't really give you a hint. She gives you the answer. She says, Father Sloof, what I wouldn't give for your counsel right about now, or something like that. So that's pretty explicit. Connemore does not give you that explicit reasoning, although I think you can pretty much infer, based on previous events, that you recruit him with Miranda. It's not that difficult to figure out. Let's talk about Amalda first, because I don't have her, I'm not going to be using her, so we might as well talk about her here. Amalda is a paladin, but she's a female paladin, so kind of like what Nana is. It is exactly what she is. She uses swords and staves, and she has pretty decent stats, and yeah, that's it. that's really all there is to her. She got decent growth rates, but ultimately you're recruiting a very decent combat unit / staff bot who's not going to be around for very many chapters where she can actually be on her horse, although she does have A rank in swords, so even if you need to bring her to a map where she's going to be on foot indoors, she can still use good weapons, so that's pretty good. As a character, I've already talked about her a lot, so I'm going to keep this pretty brief. She's a pretty tragic character, honestly. She's a very idealistic young woman, I don't know how old she is, but like she joined the Knights as an idealistic young woman who wanted to do good and who wanted to be someone who could do right in the world. And now she is realizing that she is enlisted on the wrong side, and she is doing her best to help from the inside while also protecting her subordinates, because her subordinates, she cares about them, she likes them, and she's mostly upset with the people above her who are making all these decisions. I've compared her, I think a couple times now, to Schindler from Schindler's List, and again, I think that that's really just the best way to synopsize her character. But past that, I don't really have anything else to say about her. She's pretty good. She's a pretty good character. She's a pretty good unit. I'm a fan. I like her. Now, Connemore is also a paladin, and he is the same deal, right? He has, except instead of staves, he uses lances. So let me check his. Right. So he has dual A ranks, which is really nice. So he can use every lance and every sword in the game. Again, if you want to bring him to a map where he has to be on foot, he can still use really good swords. He has good growth rates, decent base stats. For this point in the game, his base stats are actually pretty low, but you can get them up pretty quickly, especially with scrolls. He's okay. He's a perfectly serviceable filler unit, just like Amalda. Although I think I prefer Amalda just because I think the staffing is better, even if she's not A rank. Amalda only had C rank staffs. I don't know if I mentioned that, but deviating a little bit here. But if I don't say this now, I'm going to forget it. Last episode, I said that Sarah had a low staff rank. I was very wrong. She joins with B staves, and on promotion, she gets A staves immediately. So that's another reason to use her. So just minor correction there, because that's a very important distinction to make. Now, where was I? Yes, so Connemore, gameplay unit, he's fine. As a character, I actually really fucking don't like Connemore. I think he's a piece of shit, and I despise him a lot. And this is my bias showing, right? I mean, I think it's most people's bias to feel this way, but putting ourselves in the shoes of a knight of a royal family whom he feels genuinely very invested in protecting, it is understandable. However, the fact that he has let so many fucking innocent people die to protect one person is just genuinely so fucking disgusting to me. It's awful, right? I understand that she's the royal princess of Ulster or whatever, but why is one person's life worth so much to him, to the point where he's even willing to kill his people? He's actively pursuing them. I don't think the enemies actually kill them here, which is interesting. I don't know what that's about, but he is facilitating and preventing them from escaping, and who knows what's going to happen to them if they get brought back to Ulster. They're probably going to die. Many people have died already, and in fact, if you remember back in the last chapter, no, actually, sorry, the last chapter, when the random lady who was not Miranda said, hey, please come help us save Ulster, and Prince Leif was like, what about Connemore? And they said, well, we asked Connemore for help, and he said to wait, and we got tired of waiting and fought back ourselves, but we lost. So Connemore is directly responsible for a lot of the shit that is happening right now, and it's all to protect Miranda, who, frankly, I don't really like that much either. So I love Dorias. Connemore can go fuck himself, and I think that he's kind of a piece of shit loser. But it's not that important. Connemore is decent in gameplay. Now, as I was escaping, I managed to get everybody out, including the civilians. Everyone escaped, except for Connemore. Connemore died. And you know what? I don't mind. I do not like Connemore. Even if he's a decent gameplay unit, I think he's awful. So I'm not going to be... I didn't risk F for him. I considered going back and actually redoing the map to get him, but I'm not going to bother. Now, there are a few houses here. Most of them have pretty whatever dialogue, but there is one house that I actually really, really liked. Oh shit, it's not on the wiki page for the script. What the fuck? Okay, hold on. I gotta see if I can find this. Okay, so I was not able to find any script online that had this specific house. And I'm assuming that this has to be a Project Exile flavoring, but honestly, I really like it, and I want to talk about it. So I went back and I played like 2 turns of the chapter again. It didn't take very long, and got this house again. And so this guy has some pure water, and he says, I was just about to sing of the Yede massacre, the start of the kingdom's decline. And I'm not going to sing it, but I am going to read it aloud for you guys, because I think it's a very cool little poem. In seasons past, Leinster thrived with Quan upon its throne. The less esteemed Travant had dreamed of making it his own. Quan's kin by marriage Sigurd was the victim of a coup. Quan had no stake, but told him, take the aid I bring to you. The limber bond of friendship was a noose around his neck. Quan planned a course with half his force embarking on the trek. And so with gallant mounted knights and queen upon her steed, he slowly marched determined parched across the desert Yede. But oh, how Travant had waited and followed hushed as death. His flyers would not be sated till Quan drew his final breath. So from the sky a swarm of foes came soaring into view, their numbers vast, their dragons fast, their lances aiming true. The startled knights could not escape, the desert held them fast. They had to stand upon the sand as bloody wounds amassed. The heart that bled for Sigurd led his forces to their end. His kingdom snatched, his queen dispatched, no respite for his friend. This world is not an ally, it is sinister and cruel. What Quan forgot, Travant did not, the caring man's the fool. And Sigurd he took to weeping as Thracia took their rule. There's no other code worth keeping, I, the caring man's the fool. That is just a wonderful little poem that I thought was really good. It really encapsulates... Honestly, I mean, it encapsulates the entire theme of FE4, which is that sometimes doing the right thing can have unintended consequences that cause more harm than good, right? And this is from the perspective of somebody who basically is worried that Leinster is going to get recaptured and has decided that he's going to sing a little bit about how Leinster fell in the first place. And I don't know. I just liked it. I thought it was really neat. I mean, I think it kind of speaks for itself, right? But anyway, that was all I wanted to say about that. I don't think any of the houses had any other interesting dialogue, but if you know of any other houses with good dialogue, you let me know, alright? Okay, now, I played through the map, everyone got out, Connemore died, all the villagers escaped. Now, there was one other thing that I had to do, because I realized, oh shit, this is the chapter that I was going to use to have somebody get captured. Now, Chapter 21X, as I said, is the chapter where you get characters back who you have lost as they have been captured. However, you do not get access to 21X unless you have a unit to get back. If you don't have any units who have been captured over the course of the game, you will not go to 21X. And there are no other... Actually, that's not true. I mean, you can get captured in any chapter, but this is the most convenient... If you're not going to do it in Manster, you really need to do it here because it's like the most convenient place. Other than that, you just end up running into the chance that it's just not going to go well for you, and whatever, it doesn't matter. The person I ended up leaving behind was Miranda. I had originally wanted her to just get captured, but it didn't end up working out that way, so I had her standing right next to the gate, and then everyone else went in, and then I was like, alright, see you, Miranda, and then Leif went in. So she got captured, and now I'm going to be able to go to 21X to get her back. There's some good stuff in 21X, even if I wasn't doing like an every chapter in the game podcast, I would probably be going to chapter 21X just because it's a decent chapter and you get some good stuff there, so... But yeah, so that's it for chapter 19. Really good. I mean, obviously, like, we're not at the map gauntlet yet, but I already said it's probably my favorite chapter in the game. But I'll talk a little bit more about comparisons at the end. Now, once you escape with Leif, the chapter ends, and there's a very long cutscene here that goes into a lot of the details about how Leif is feeling about all this, how Dorias being dead is affecting him, and all that stuff. But again, we're going to go into all of that at the end. So instead, the only relevant part of this conversation is the fact that Leif is, he's feeling very dejected. And August says, hey, I have some good news. There is a rebellion going on in Isaac. And if we hold out long enough, they will reach us and they will be able to help us. And the leader of that rebellion is Leif. So we're seeing that FE4 Gen 2 has started and Leif is kind of making his move. And we actually see exactly what has happened here. Because in FE4 Chapter 7, we see the immediate aftermath of this move on Leif's part. If you remember, at the beginning of FE4 Chapter 7, it cuts to Leif's POV, and he talks about how he just made a move on Ulster that failed and his entire army has been decimated. Now, obviously, this is not exactly the same scenario. I've always chosen to believe that FE4 was just, like, simplifying for the sake of what's going on, right? Like, Orson and Dagdar and all these other guys might be there with Leif, but we just don't see them in FE4. But there's also people who believe that it literally was his entire army, and now Leif, Nana, and Finn are literally the only people left. I don't think that that's true, but it could possibly be. It doesn't really matter that much, but. And so that they imply that because of that, FE5 is like a separate timeline or like a reimagining of events. I don't know if I buy all that, but I think it's more like this is actually what was happening in FE4. It just was not shown to us due to the scale being so zoomed out that it just wasn't relevant. But if you believe that it is just like these are different events than what happened in FE4, that's also fine. That's a completely reasonable conclusion to draw. There is some talk, like Leif and August talk a little bit about Leif, but this ties into everything that's going on with Leif right now. So I'm going to wait to talk about that. And then if all the civilians escaped, you get a night crest. So all's well that ends well. Everything's good. And yeah, so that's chapter 19. Love it. Great. But I already talked about that, so I'm not going to deliberate any further. And instead, we're going to move right into chapter 20, which is called The Scion of Light. So in the opening narration for this chapter, we find out that it's been 6 months since the end of the last chapter. And during that time, Leinster has been basically under siege the entire time. Leif, as kind of mentioned in the previous chapter, is kind of trying to buy time until Leif can get there, basically. And it's not going too well. I mean, 6 months is a pretty decent amount of time to hold out for, but they're not, they're not going to be able to hold out forever. It's really only a matter of time before the castle falls, and they're just putting off the inevitable, basically. After the opening narration, we get an enemy POV, which, I'm going to stop making comments about it probably, because otherwise we'll be here all day. But it's just funny how it happens in, basically every chapter. And we see, for the first time, I believe, Reinhardt, who we've heard a lot about, but we've never actually met him before. He's here, and he's checking in with the general in charge of the siege, whose name is Barat. And he basically tells Barat, you need to get this done fast. You've been here for 6 months. You have not accomplished what you have been stationed here to do, and Bloom is not happy with you. You need to get this done ASAP, or there are going to be consequences. Probably deadly consequences. And Barat says, okay, we will expedite this a little bit, and starts ordering his men to do their last final push, basically, which they think is probably going to be the final straw. You're not going to be able to hold out from this one. Oh, and we find out that Selef has crossed the border onto the Thracian peninsula. So this is where they have just killed Ishtor and are making their way in. This is where you would recruit Tinny in FE4 Chapter 7. So they're right on the doorstep, basically. Then we then cut to Leif's POV. He and August are talking, basically saying like, oh, we gotta set up the defenses. Leif kind of muses a little bit about how, they held out pretty long, but it's probably not going to last for much longer. And August says something that is pretty harsh, even by his standards. It makes me wonder if this is maybe an overly literal translation or something. I'm not sure, but I mean, August is obviously kind of a dick, but I don't think he's ever really been this harsh to Leif directly. But I'm not sure. Anyway, what he says is, "Bah, you've become overfond of such feeble whining. It's unseemly for a prince of your stature. If you're not willing to fight to the last breath, you're betraying the memory of all who have sacrificed themselves to get us this far. Don't forget the big picture. We're keeping the bulk of the enemy's forces busy here, which frees Selef's army to march through Thracia unimpeded. You mustn't give up before we're able to merge our forces." So most of that is fine. It's just general pep talk. And it's definitely not out of character for August to be like kind of blunt with Leif. But I think saying that he's become overly fond of feeble whining is like a little, I don't know, that's a little bit excessive from him, I think, personally. I'm not sure, though. Anyway, Leif probably deserved it, but we'll talk about all that at the end. Now, this map is really interesting on a lot of levels. First of all, it has a very unique victory condition where it's a defend map, yes, but you also have to kill the boss. And it's not one of those things where, like, oh, killing the boss ends the map early. You need to do both. The map will not end on turn 15 if the boss is still alive. So preferably getting him out of the way as soon as possible would be helpful, but you don't necessarily have to. In fact, he starts moving on turn 15, so it might be a little easier to just wait him out and have him come to you. I'm not sure. It's whatever you want to do. I managed to take him out pretty early, but not everyone's going to be able to do that, I guess. This is the only other defense map in the game besides Chapter 14, and honestly, I really wish Kaga had done more of them, because I think he really knew how to design a defense map. This is a really good map. It's not as good as Chapter 14 in my opinion, but it's definitely quite awesome. And I think a big part of that is the same thing that made Chapter 14 so good, which is that the enemies here are legitimately very threatening, and they really force you to put yourself out there, and you can't just hole up in the keep and not come out at all. You really need to make an active effort to push forward, but overextending is very possible. So you need to be careful in that sense. So I don't know. It's cool. I like it. It's a good map. There's so many reinforcements. There's so many reinforcements, and a lot of them are very strong. There's magic enemies, there's ballista, there's physical enemies, there's all sorts of different mages, and there are sages and clerics that have utility staves to help their guys. One particularly funny addition is there are some clerics or sages, I don't remember which, that have unlock staves, which are only supposed to be usable by Tina. I don't know why Tina is the only person who can use them on our side. But everyone can use them on the enemy side, I guess. Anyway, there is a cell, like a jail cell, in the castle that has some red units in it, and I guess they're supposed to be like the people you captured in Chapter 18 or something like that. It doesn't directly correlate to like how many enemies you captured in that map or anything like that. They just always are there. I guess it's assumed that they're enemies who got captured over the 6-month time skip that we don't see. I'm not sure. But anyway, one of the sages will unlock that door to the jail cell and have them come out and start fighting you. And it's actually a really neat idea that never really gets repeated. And I think that that's a shame. It probably should be. Your army is positioned really weirdly. And I don't necessarily like it in this map as much as I do in the other maps, because I think it's kind of frustrating to be so spread out. You know, there's a chest in this map, and it's possible for your thieves to all end up like on the completely opposite side of the map. I don't know. It doesn't. I don't really feel like it adds anything to this map other than frustration. Whereas the past couple maps, I think it actually enhanced the experience to a certain extent. It made you have to approach the map in like a more interesting way, whereas this is just like, oh, it just adds extra tedium, it adds a few more turns. I don't know. I didn't really get much of a kick out of it, to be honest. But I did say that all 3 maps in this episode use the positioning mechanic, or I guess the lack of a positioning mechanic, in an interesting way, which is kind of true. Like, I get what they were going for here, right? It's kind of interesting to have to like fight your way out of an unfavorable position, but it also kind of just makes Leif look like a dumbass. Like, why are Tina and Lara defending like the front lines? Basically, it's a little odd. I don't think that actually happened to me, but it is possible, and I just think that that's funny. There are some good items to steal here. First of all, there's a master seal in the chest, which is valuable because there are a lot of characters you want to promote in this game, and I think you probably will have most of them promoted by now, but you might want the extra master seal. It's definitely worthwhile to get it. I ended up having it stolen by a sage with one of the unlock staff sages, and so I had to go up and steal it from him and then rescue Pan out of the way. It was interesting. The boss has a master lance and a fortify staff. He's a baron. We're actually starting to see barons for the first time, and barons have like A rank in fucking everything. Except wind. He has C rank in wind for some reason. But A in everything else. He has a scroll, if you're keeping track of the scrolls. I think that this has got to be the last one, right? There's no way there's many more than this. I think this is either the last one or there's like 1 or 2 left. I'm not sure. So yeah, I mean, it's relatively straightforward. You just got to hold out. I think that the unlock staff guys are going to catch a lot of people off guard. The enemies can break down the walls. You can actually see on various walls there are like cracks in them, and when they can, enemies will like go for those cracks and blow down the walls and make them traversable. This is actually the only way you can get out of some of these rooms. Actually, no, that's not true. There are doors you can unlock, but it's probably easier to get out, especially if you're in that room on the lower right. And yeah, you kind of like pile in. You have to be a little bit aggressive especially if you want like good items. But especially when the long range ballista come in, that's when things start to get really hairy. I actually ended up losing Xavier on this map, which I didn't reset for. I'm considering it. Like, technically, I haven't played Chapter 21 yet, so I could just go back and redo Chapter 20. That wouldn't be unreasonable, I don't think, but I'm probably just going to leave him dead because I don't really need to have everyone, I don't really mind leaving him dead. It's really not that big of a deal. He's not as good as I thought he was, to be honest. I mean, he's got good defense, but he's still taking like a shit ton of damage from these ballista, and he has a cost. So he has the same problem as Dagdar, where he just gets shot a whole bunch by different ballista, and even if they wouldn't double him otherwise, he gets hit like 2, 3, maybe even 4 times, and he just, can't catch a break, I guess. Oh, there's a little, I guess deception is the wrong word, but you might be tempted to buy torches from this shop, but you actually don't really need to. There's only one more Fog of War map in the entire game. It is quite annoying and quite bullshit, but you're probably fine. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I think I have a torch left, and I definitely have like a couple uses of the torch staff, so I should be fine. But I would really only pick up 1 or 2 if you don't have any, because it's not really going to be very useful for you going forward. Killing the boss is actually really easy. I mean, maybe it's just because I have Asvel, or who did I do it with? It wasn't Asvel, was it? It was Marita. I had Marita do it. Marita's really fucking strong. I have a absolutely busted Marita. So she just walked up and killed the boss, and it was pretty good. And then she had to get the hell out of there because otherwise she was just going to get her ass kicked. So, yeah, there's not really a whole lot left to say about this map. I think it's good. I think it uses some really interesting ideas and is reasonably challenging without being like overly bullshit. I do think the reinforcement spam is a little much. I kind of wish that they had chilled out on that a little bit, but it's not really the end of the world. I think it's still a good map, and probably my least favorite of the three we played in this episode, but I think I might have already mentioned this, but having an episode of this game with entirely good chapters is, up to this point, unprecedented, and spoiler alert, will not be happening again. The remaining 2 episodes of this series, or of this game, will not have all good maps, let me tell you that much. At least I'm pretty sure they won't. I don't remember the late game super well, but I remember not liking it very much, so, we'll see. So after turn 15 comes around, if the boss is dead, or after you kill the boss, if it's after turn 15, the map will end, the enemy will start retreating, and August tells Leif that it's because Leif is here. Leif has come to help us, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. That's going to be great. They're going to collab. They're going to do they're going to host a podcast together. It's going to be fantastic. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. This is why I shouldn't record late at night, but here I am. Anyway, Leif is here. He has sent a emissary, or a messenger, to Leif to communicate that he is here, and it is actually Diarmuid, who is a character who you remember from FE4. He is Nana's brother, and there's some dialogue here. There's dialogue here no matter what happens, but if Nana is alive, she will get a little bit of time with him, and they have a nice little conversation. A very interesting one, actually. So here, let me find it. Yeah, so Diarmuid says that he only learned about Nana from Lewin, and they talk about Lewin for a minute, and supposedly, according to Lewin, Lachesis is still alive. Now, this is something we speculated on back in Chapter 6, I think, wherever we found out that people have been going missing in the Yi Desert or whatever. The implication there is obviously that the Loptir cult is turning people to stone. And we know that Lachesis vanished in the desert, so putting 2 and 2 together, it stands to reason that Lachesis would be a stone statue somewhere in the desert. Now, that isn't explicitly what they say here, I want to make that clear, but it's the only thing that makes sense, right? Like, if Lewin knows that Lachesis is alive, we know where she disappeared, it just makes sense that this would be what it is. And they say that they're going to search for her together after the war is over. So that's nice, they're probably going to find her at that point. And hopefully Sarah's alive, because otherwise they ain't getting shit done. But, we'll see, I guess. Diarmuid then asks Leif if it is okay for him to transfer into Leif's army, away from Leif's army. And Leif says, sure, yeah, absolutely. So Diarmuid is now recruited, and we will talk about him next chapter, because we're able to play as him for the first time at the beginning of next chapter. So we'll talk about him then. But for now, that's it. That's chapters 18, 19, and 20. I really liked all of these chapters. It is a great set of chapters overall. Probably chapter 19 I've already said is my favorite map in the game. Chapter 18 might be in my top 3 as well. I think it goes probably chapter 19, chapter 14, and then chapter 18. And 20 is up there as well. So we got some really solid maps this time around. And I was very happy to play them, and I'm very excited to get into the late games where we can talk about how BS some of these maps are, at least as far as I remember. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll prove myself wrong. So let's make good on that promise from earlier and talk a little bit about the major plot events of these chapters. So it's kind of hard to overstate how impactful these events are and how central these are to the game, because I don't know about the rest of you guys, but for me, when I think of FE5, and specifically FE5's plot and its story, this is the moment that comes to mind first. This is Leif's defining moment as a character, at least in this game. You can argue that he gets more in FE4, but for this game, this is the moment for Leif. He fucks up. He makes a huge mistake, and it backfires massively. And I didn't even mention, when Leif makes this mistake, I think it's in chapter 19 or maybe chapter 20, I'm not sure, but at some point he loses a leadership star. He had 2 for a while, and now he only has 1, which is really, really good, cool gameplay story integration. I love that shit. It's awesome. This is the moment that sets Leif apart from other lords in the series for so many people. I know a ton of people who really like Leif and consider him one of the best lords in the series, if not the best. And when asked why, they usually point to this moment, at least first. You know, this is probably the biggest thing for a lot of people. And it's really easy to see why. I mean, like, how many other lords in the series fuck up this badly and have to deal with the ramifications of that? The answer is a few, actually, but it's a little bit different, right? Like, when I think of lords that fuck up, besides Leif, I think of, like, Erica at the end of Sacred Stones, when she gives the stone to Leon. Spoilers, I guess, but... or I think of Celica in FE15, when she goes with Jeddah, right? Like, these things are monumental fuck-ups, but they don't really fuck up in the same way as Leif does here. Like, this is a genuine tactical error on Leif's part, whereas the others, you know, it's mostly because they gave into their emotions, or they were basically the flaw, quote unquote, that got in their way and that caused them to make this mistake is actually their virtue. You know what I mean? Like, Celica is a kind, caring person. She wants everyone to be happy and to be safe. And so she makes this decision, but it doesn't really feel like a character flaw per se. It just feels like she's taking her virtue and taking it too far. I'm not sure if this is making sense, but I think it's a key distinction that you need to make here, because Leif's mistake here is purely tactical. He gets a big ego, which is not in any way a strong positive trait to have. It's just not. And it causes him to fuck up. And that's cool. That's awesome. Now, I am going to make some complaints. I'm going to file some complaints with the complaint department. I want to preface all that, though, by saying that this is probably the best moment in the story still. There are some moments earlier that I think are comparable, maybe a little bit better. Like, I think some of the stuff with the bandits in Chapter 8X was maybe my favorite moment in the game, narratively, but this stuff is also really, really, really good. So I wanted to get that out of the way, because even though I have some criticisms of this, I just want to make it real clear that I do really love these plot points, and that I just wish that they had been tweaked a little bit to make them even better. So I think the biggest criticism I have of this is that it doesn't really feel in line with previously established flaws in Leif's character. Now, Leif is a very flawed character. We've seen plenty of times where he's fucked up or made small mistakes, or just in general has not been a excellent, well-rounded human being. I think Chapter 8X is like the prime example of this. He's so short-sighted and naive, frankly, that he can't see why, you know, these bandits would do these things, and just assumes that they're evil monsters or whatever it is. He has a very short-sighted view of Thracia, the country of Thracia. He hates them, and he thinks that they're monsters, does not want to side with them. He really puts up a fight about that in Chapter 6. He's frankly kind of sheltered, which, you know, we've seen a little bit with him denying the existence of the child hunts, and I speculated a little bit about how I thought that was because he has just been protected his whole life, and people have helped him out of the kindness of their hearts, so he has not really been exposed to how cruel and unjust the world could be. So there's plenty of material to work with for this, and they kind of do it a little bit in one of the cutscenes, but we'll get there. We'll get to that in a second. But for the most part, this is fueled mostly by a new flaw that Leif has developed, which is fine. It's okay for him to have another flaw that is introduced here. But Leif's ego has not really been a sticking point for him up to this point, right? Like, he's always been relatively humble. He has very strong opinions on people who are, you know, who he perceives as bad, right? So you could see that as an ego thing. Like, he thinks he's better than them, kind of, even if he's not doing it consciously. But that's a little bit of a stretch. I think it's really just hard for me to see him as being egotistical. And you could argue he's not being egotistical. I think there's more to it than that. I think there are a lot of layers to this decision that he's making. But I think it's pretty widely accepted, at least from the circles that I'm in, that a big factor in this decision is that Leif got Leinster back. He was feeling real good about himself. And he said, you know what? We can get Ulster back too. We can do this. We got this. And if, it fucked up. And the exact details of it, as I've mentioned, change depending on whether or not you have Miranda. If you have Miranda, she basically says, hey, you need to fulfill your promise to me right now. Go get Ulster back for me right now. And Leif says, okay. And I don't like that. I actually really don't like that. I think that sucks a lot because it takes, I mean, obviously it's still Leif's decision, right? But it feels like it's taking the agency away from Leif, right? It's having another character come in and tell him, Leif, you need to do this. It's basically someone else spurring him on. Like she is making this demand of him, and she is, basically cashing this check that she has, which is like, you owe me. You fucked me over earlier, you owe me one. And that just feels like it takes some of the autonomy out of Leif's hands, even though, yeah, he could say no, but, I mean, he's not gonna say no. Why would he say no, right? It's not, it's not in his character to say no. So to me, that feels like much less of a flaw as it is, in the same situation as Erica or Celica, where he wants to do the right thing, and he just does it bad, which is less interesting to me than him having an actual genuine character flaw, which is that he's getting a little cocky and a little bit full of himself. The other scenario I feel like I'm a little bit more open to, which is if you do not have Miranda, the village woman comes in and says, hey, we organized a rebellion. We lost, basically, and we're getting our asses kicked. You need to come help us. I'm a little bit more open to this because it feels like less of a demand that is being put on Leif and more of a request, right? This person is saying, please, can you help us? We're in danger. We really need you to help us. But she is not in any kind of position of authority over Leif. Leif doesn't owe this person anything, right? And it would still very much be out of character for him to refuse here. But I also think that it doesn't feel like anyone is forcing his hand here. He is making the call. More so than if Miranda's alive, where it feels like she is basically saying, you need to do this. She is making the call for him, which, I mean, maybe that's just my read. I don't like that about Miranda being here. But she's I don't like Miranda in general, to be honest. Speaking of characters I don't like, I didn't talk much about this. I don't think. But after there's been a bit of a gap between recording chapter 19 and recording chapter 20, I had a nice long think about our friend Connemore. Man, I really fucking hate Connemore. The more I think about him, the more I think he might be my least favorite character in this game, because he's such a piece of shit. He is so obsessed with the well-being of Miranda specifically that he is willing to let his people die, and even in the case of chapter 19, actively chase after them to bring them back to the Empire to be executed because he doesn't want Miranda to be killed, which is an understandable motivation. But he is not, he is, okay. So I need to cross this bridge. I need to cross this bridge, I know. Miranda and Connemore, in their endings, are implied to end up in a relationship. This is really fucked up because Miranda is 14 years old, and I mean, I don't even think I need to explain why that's fucked up, right? Like, I'm not even gonna bother going into more detail about that. You all know that's fucked up. At least I hope you do. And yeah, so obviously, elephant in the room. That's weird, right? But putting that aside for a second, it is understandable, if he is in love with Miranda, it is very easy to see why he would not make the decision to go against the Empire and risk her dying. but that doesn't mean I have to like it. Just because it's a decision that I understand doesn't mean that it doesn't make him a piece of shit, right? Like, just because he wants some teenage coochie, he decides to, fuck over his entire country, basically. And either that or he legitimately thinks that the life of the ruling figure in Ulster is more important than the people who actually live there, which is not, like, obviously if this were realistic to real world medieval politics, then that is completely believable. But Fire Emblem lords have always been, like, very unrealistic in that regard. They are much more receptive to having the common people be, like, a priority. And so it just feels out of character for a person who you're ostensibly supposed to feel is good and just and right, to have him be like a commentary on knights' willingness to let the common people suffer and die for royalty. On the other hand, we do see this come up a couple times with August and Dorias, so maybe it's not too out of the question, but I don't know. Regardless, this is all to say that I really fucking don't like Connemore, and I think there's a really solid chance he ends up on the bottom of the list for characters in this game. I think he's a piece of shit, and I don't like him. That is all. Anyway, where was I? So Miranda telling Leif to go invade Ulster feels like it takes some agency away from him, because even though it is his choice, it feels like she is kind of pushing him in that direction and lording over him with this fact of, like, hey, you promised you would do this for me. We need you to do it right now. And that just feels worse to me than someone coming and pleading with Leif for help and him making the decision to help them. Anyway, I've gotten a little bit far away from the main point here, which is that this is not really something that Leif has been shown to struggle with in the past. Like, he's always wanted to help people. And even to the point where he is willing to deviate from his main goal, right? Like, you think back to, like, Chapter 2, where he, Nana and Merida have been captured, and they need to go save them, but he is still willing to step in and save these villagers, even though, he doesn't know or care about them at all. He just thinks it's the right thing to do, which it is. And he's willing to put Merida and Nana's rescue on hold for that, which definitely feels like you could extrapolate that to what we see in these chapters. The problem that I have is that it just feels like so stupid, right? Like, he is blatantly ignoring, at least in Chapter 2, you can argue he didn't have advisors at that point. August does not join him by that point. Dorias comes in, like, way after that point. So he doesn't have anyone except Finn to guide him at that point, basically, and Finn is just going to go along with whatever he wants, right? So Leif has never, I don't think, I could be wrong about this, but I do not think that Leif has ever disagreed with his advisors. I mean, in situations where Dorias and August are opposed, he might side with one of them over the other, like in the route split, right? Is he going to side with Dorias or is he going to side with August? That happens sometimes, right? But this is one of the rare instances where both Dorias and August are on the same page and say, Leif, you should not do this. This is going to be a disaster. And Leif just ignores them, which just feels like weirdly out of character for him. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys can see something in Leif that I don't, that makes this more believable. But it's just a little bit odd for me, I guess. It doesn't feel in line with the character that we've gotten to know up to this point. I could very easily see how he could get here, right? Again, I think having him get a little bit of an inflated ego is not unreasonable at this point in his journey, right? He just got his home castle back, and he's ready to go. He feels really good. So that part's fine. I understand that. It's just, it feels a little bit sloppy that they would introduce this new character trait of his, like at the last minute. I guess not the last minute, but, like right before it becomes necessary for it to move the plot along. Maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing. Again, I still do really like these plot points. It's just a little bit odd to me. Now, I did see a really good take from one of my friends, actually Spike, the guy who I was on with a few episodes ago, the 14X and 15 episode, I think it was. He said something that I found really interesting, which is that it is kind of an extension of what Dorias and August have been teaching him the entire game. They've been teaching him these moral lessons that he has taken with him throughout his adventure, like helping the common people, honoring your promises, being the ruler that you were meant to be, right? Like, these are things that they are telling him to do the entire game. And I think in this moment where Leif decides to attack Alster, he is, in his mind, living up to that, right? Especially the helping the common people part. Like, the common people are dying, and Leif is not able to see the fact that if he goes now, he's not going to be able to help them anyway. But this is something that August has been encouraging him to do the entire game, and I think that's a really good point that I hadn't considered, and I thank Spike for bringing that to my attention, because it's not something I would have even thought about otherwise. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting take. Like, they kind of set him up in this way where he was always going to make this decision. I still don't think that necessarily outweighs the fact that he has always gone along with what they have suggested, because he's always been, like, generally willing to defer to their judgment. He is humble enough to recognize that he is not strong enough to do this on his own. He needs his advisors. He needs the people who are smarter than him and more tactically inclined than he is. He recognizes that. He always has. And so it just feels a little weird to me that all of a sudden he would decide that he knows best and that August and Dorias are wrong. And I mean, I guess, it's not unreasonable, I don't think, given the circumstances. It's just a little weird to me. It feels a little sloppy, and like they could have tweaked it just a little bit to make it a little bit more believable for Leif. Like, for example, I think they could have... Well, it's tricky, right? Because we know how this goes down in FE4, right? Actually, no, that's not true, because by the time FE4 is in swing, it's chapter 20. Oh, okay, yeah, I got it. Here's what you could do, right? So say that the woman shows up. Just get Miranda out of there, right? Fuck Miranda. Get her out of there. Have the woman show up in both routes and have her say, Leif, we've started a rebellion. We're getting our asses kicked. Please come help us. By the way, supposedly they have enlisted the help of the Thracian Draco Knights, and they are on their way and are going to try to kill us as well. Now, Leif, being the Thracia hater that he is, I think that that's more likely to get him to jump the gun and assume that if Thracia is involved, things are going to go very badly and that everyone's going to get slaughtered, right? I think that seems like in character for Leif, because Leif fucking hates Thracia. Now, obviously, the problem with that is that Thracia would not help the Empire in this way. Thracia has very much been shown to be doing its own thing, to not be on good terms with the Empire. But, A, you could just have it be a rumor, right? Like, maybe it's not actually even true. Or, I think the more likely explanation that you could do is have the Thracian Draco Knights actually show up in Chapter 19. Maybe have them fight for a few turns, and then have Trevant show up and say, hey, we're not helping them anymore. We're pulling back, and we're gonna try to do our own thing. Which would set up perfectly what we see in Chapter 8 of FE4, where the Thracian Draco Knights are basically not even fighting for the Empire anymore at that point. It's a little sloppy. You would have to do some work on it. I'm not a professional writer or anything like that, but I think that would be more fitting because it is in line with a flaw that we've already seen that Leif has, which is that he is very quick to assume the worst and jump the gun when Thracia is involved. Either way, I think that what's in the game is good, but I just think it could have been better. I spent a lot of time talking to basically just say that. I think that what's in the game is good, but I also think it could have been better. That's fine. This I don't think I'm spending too much time on it, right? Because this is, for a lot of people, including myself, the defining moment of Thracia's story, and the one where Leif really shows off how he differentiates himself from other lords. So, I don't know. I think it's worthy of a long form discussion like this. I just, when you can boil it down to a sentence like that, I can see why it might sound a little long-winded. Anyway, the last thing I want to talk about in regards to this is that I think Dorias really shows off as a character here. The fact that he is willing to sacrifice himself. Like, he knows what he's walking into, right? He does not intend to walk out of this alive. So I think, when he goes down to Ulster, he knows I'm not coming back. August, you need to look after Leif. And they have that, like, little... This is actually one of my favorite moments in the game where Dorias and August are, like, talking over Leif's head a little bit. Like, they both are on the same page about what's about to happen. Leif is too naive to pick up on it, even though it's, like, kind of really obvious. But Leif just can't see it because he's young or because he's, just blinded by his desire to help or whatever. He doesn't pick up on it, so. And yeah, he resigns himself to the fact that he's going to die, and he needs August at Leif's side to help reclaim the rest of the peninsula. That's a really cool moment, and while I still think I'm ultimately Team August, this definitely puts some points in Dorias' column. So, we stand. Rest in peace, Dorias, you will be missed. Even though you were kind of a dickbag, but, who cares, really? And that is it for our chapters for the episode. Now, for our map gauntlet, we'll rush through this real quick because I've already basically told you guys. Chapter 19 is my favorite map of this chapter. It is also my favorite map of the game. I am going to put it above Chapter 14 and say that this is our new reigning champion of Thracia 776, and I don't see it being dethroned. I really don't. There might be some chapters that surprise me and are better than I remember them being, but I don't think that any of them are going to be Chapter 20, or Chapter 19, sorry. I think the fact that it uses Thracia's weird mechanics in such interesting ways that actually, for once, enhance the gameplay instead of just exclusively detracting from it, I think almost makes this entire journey up to this point worth it. Almost. So, we're getting a lot of news about Fire Emblem Engage, which is really cool. We're getting some stuff on the different characters. We have some names for some of these guys. Vander, who's the Jagan, it seems like. We got Cram and Fram, who are some early game units who are going to help you out. I think that's all we got we got Alfred. He's pretty cool. It seems like. So we got some stuff going on here. Actually, this stuff might have been out when I did the last episode. Shit. Oh well. Whatever. We're talking about it now. I'm still reserving judgment until I have the game in my hands. Basically, I'm not really plugged into everything that's going on with Engage, but. I don't really have a lot of comments to say on it. I don't really know that much about it. It doesn't seem like we're getting a whole lot of tidbits from Twitter or anything like that, so not a whole lot in the news department. Now, in the me department, there's a fair bit going on. I have been watching a lot of anime. I finished Inuyasha. I finished Yu Yu Hakusho. I finished Rakugo Shinju. And now I'm currently watching March Comes In Like a Lion. So, that's exciting. I liked all those other shows. Maybe I'll do some kind of anime-related like bonus episodes or something like that at some point. I'm not sure. I can barely get the the actual episodes out in a timely manner. So, and then for games, I'm playing a little bit. I got my hands on a PlayStation 4. I've been wanting to get a PlayStation 4 for a very long time. But I never managed to get one. Not managed. I could have bought one at any time, but they're expensive, right? So one day my friend tells me, "Hey, I will sell you my PlayStation 4 just as soon as I get my hands on a PlayStation 5." And I said, "That's great." And this was like right before it came out. So I was like, "All right, cool. A few months in, he'll get it, and then I'll get the PS4. That's awesome." Obviously, if you've even attempted or been at all plugged in to anything about the PS5, you know that it is notoriously difficult to get one. Although I think that might be starting to be alleviated because I've been seeing a lot more people get them recently. So I'm not sure if that's maybe something's going on. Maybe they're getting the supply a little bit beefed up. I'm not sure, but anyway, it took my friend 2 years to get a PlayStation 5, and so he finally sold me his PS4. And I have a few games with it. I'm very excited. I have already beaten Shadow of the Colossus, which is a fantastic game. I had been hearing so much about it for years and years and years. And finally I managed to play it. I played the PS4 remake, and it's just really fucking good. A couple bosses here and there, I think could have been better, but it's a really solid game. I have Persona 4 Royal, which I do genuinely love Persona. I know that there's some people, sometimes a lot of people don't like Persona, and that's fine. It has a lot of shit in there that I don't necessarily like either. But I love Persona. Persona 4 Golden is the only one that I've played, so I guess I shouldn't say that I like Persona. I like Persona 4 Golden a lot, but I haven't played any of the other games, so I'm very excited to get to Persona 5 Royal and experience that for the first time. He gave me Dragon Quest 11, which is pretty cool. I had never played a Dragon Quest game before. Actually, no, that's not true. I played Dragon Quest 9, and I didn't like it very much, but apparently Dragon Quest 11 is very different. And then I bought, but have not yet played, Spider-Man PS4, the Game of the Year version. So I'm excited about that. I love Spider-Man. Spider-Man is my favorite superhero, and I love most of the recent movies about him. And I love Spider-Man 2 for the GameCube and PlayStation 2. So I am super excited to play this game because it seems like it actually really captures that vibe more than any game before or after, Spider-Man for the PS2. So, or Spider-Man 2 for the PS2. So, I'm very excited to test out the shiny new toy. I have some cool stuff to play, and I will definitely report back to you guys with some some progress and see how things are going. Hopefully, it doesn't distract me from getting this episode edited and uploaded, which I'm hoping to have done by the end of this week, maybe even the middle of this week if I can do it quickly enough. I'm not sure though. We'll have to see. So, anyway, next episode, we are going to be tackling chapters 21, 21X, and 22. So look forward to that. We're almost to the end of the game. We have next episode, and then the episode after that, we're going to be doing the rest of the chapters. And then the episode after that is like the final thoughts, wrap up, any additional info that I want to share with you guys. And then we'll be done. So look forward to that. I'm thinking early December finish date is not unrealistic, although I do need to hurry it up a little bit for sure. But we'll see how that goes. So I will talk to you all next time, and have a good rest of your day. I'm trying to be more active on Twitter, so you might see me poke around on Twitter a little bit more. But other than that, have a nice rest of your day. Bye bye.